Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Outside Looking In, the podcast series wherein I, Samson Folk, talk to somebody from every single market so that you, the listener, can kind of learn what the outside world thinks of the Raptors, finding a consensus of sorts. And so slowly but surely, you learn about the league at large. Today, we're talking about the Pelicans with Shamit Dua. And, he's very in the know with the Pelicans. That's his Substack. If you're interested in following the team this year, we'll have a more hearty plug at the end. But basically, Shamit is somebody who pays attention a lot to how the game operates as far as like the transactional side, a lot better than what you'll see in a lot of other markets. And then, of course, knows a lot about like play styles, success of certain players, and somebody who, based on the conversation we had last year, also knows a lot about the Raptors, which is, it's good to have a healthy idea of what's going on around the league. Shamit, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I appreciate the introduction. It was very flattering. So I will take those compliments. And yeah, I'm excited to talk basketball, specifically NBA basketball. I know it's been a long off season, and we're right there. Media days is a few weeks away. Training camp is right around the corner, and to me, this is my favorite time of the year.
Hell yeah. So, something interesting. I know you like team building. We held a live podcast last season, and it was pretty close to before the trade deadline. Nothing crazy had happened yet. And during that, one of my answers was kind of asked, I was asked about the Raptors team building, and I appealed to the Pelicans as if you're going to build through kind of a Vision 6-9 ethos, or if you're going to really try and build through wings, it's important that spacing is there. It's important that, there's more than just measurables. It has to be the marriage of skill sets and measurables. And as the Raptors have let a couple guys who were part of that 6-9 ethos go and have changed directions to some degree, I wanted to ask you, do you see any similarities in the Pelicans team building and the Raptors?
I do. I actually do. And I'll be honest, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing that those similarities are there. Mostly because I think last time when you had me on this podcast, um, we had a similar conversation, and I was excited for Vision 6-9. I was excited to see how the Raptors would do. I was excited for the Pelicans to try to replicate that in their own unique fashion, right? I think with the year's worth of data, looking at the Pelicans specifically, and kind of looking from the outside in on the Raptors, um, I'm not the biggest fan of Vision 6-9 anymore. I do value the play of big men a lot, and I think the Pelicans. I think the Pelicans specifically underutilized their big man in Jonas Valanciunas in favor of downsizing a little bit, playing Larry Nance Jr. at the five, and to their credit, when Zion was healthy, those Zion and Larry lineups just dominated. They feasted upon opponents frequently because much like how the Raptors saw success in their 6-9 lineups, they generated a lot of turnovers, right? So they were possession merchants in that regard. They were fast break merchants in that regard, and it's really hard to stop Zion if you kind of space out the floor there. Where they ran into issues, and I believe the Raptors similarly ran into issues, is against those bigger teams that are just better. They had more talent. They couldn't win the possession battle because they couldn't out rebound them. And the Pelicans, more so than the Raptors, when they downsize and they go to Larry at the five, the only real net advantage they gain is the ability to switch 1 through 5 and be general pests on defense. And they have a lot of athletic wings that can step in and kind of create havoc just wherever they need to. And Larry played a big role in that. But, Herb Jones, turnover generation machine, Trey Murphy stepped into his own. Zion, when he was healthy, was an event generator. And particularly in the clutch, he just found a way to dig deep and come up with big plays. And their guards, Jose Alvarado, Dyson Daniels. I can't believe I forgot Brandon Ingram. So it's a lot of those type of players who were good at that unique thing, but they never gained the true advantage of going small. Is usually you get your best offensive players on the court, you get more 3-point shooting on the court, you space them out, and that is generally the trade-off when it comes to going small. Is you sacrifice the rebounding, you sacrifice the offensive glass, and you sacrifice an interior presence in favor of more offense, more shooting, and the ability to switch. And I think the Pelicans weren't able to maximize that because of their personnel. And I would like them to move in a direction where they have that button that they can push anytime. Like, hey, we want to go turbo, we want to go small, we'll go Larry at the five against certain matchups. I don't want that to be the default look, which is what it ended up being. I distinctly remember games against the Utah Jazz, and Utah was trying out Walker Kessler, Laurie Markkinen, and Kelly Olynyk at the same time.
Hmm.
That's three basically 7-footers. And the Pels' biggest person was Larry Nance Jr. on the court, and they got punished. And my whole thing was like, if JV can't be on the court when Walker Kessler is on the court, you might as well trade him for a guy that the coach wants to play, because that's a situation where you're your ability to switch is not going to help you. And so you haven't, and then you're losing the math game when it comes to the 3-point shooting, the rebounding, and everything else. So I would like them to embrace playing a little bit bigger while having the small look in their back pocket for some of these other teams that do like to go small.
So with that said, you've seen what the Raptors have done. Obviously, the swap of functionally Fred VanVleet leaves, Dennis Schroeder and Jalen McDaniels come in. Maybe McDaniels factors in. Maybe he doesn't have such a good season. Schroeder will certainly. If you ask people around the league, fans, front office members, coaches, etc., about 99% of people are going to say that Fred VanVleet is a demonstrably better guard than Schroeder. And obviously, Fred got paid more than his impact will, like the outcome of his impact will be. But if you ask people in Toronto, quite a few people had grown fans had grown tired of watching Fred. Are happy to see Schroeder in. But the big difference is that when they traded for Jakob Poeltl, and despite losing quite a few games, 4 or 5 in embarrassing fashions, very gettable games, and not stealing any wins, they went at like a 47-48 win pace. Now with that swap, Schroeder comes in. It might be Scottie, OG, and Gary as like the backcourt. It might be a funky starting lineup, but going big, playing a lot of Pirtle, abandoning like the pest like defense for something more conservative. Do you feel better about the Raptors making that type of, I guess, shift?
Yes and no. I think Fred's going to be missed a lot on defense first and foremost, and I guess Pirtle is sort of there to mitigate some of those issues. But Fred is an All NBA caliber defender, and that's not necessarily easy to replace. I think Schroeder has his moments when he's locked in. I'm curious to see how he will function with what seems to be a greater offensive role than his previous stints. Obviously that's still up in the air, just depending on how I guess the new coaching staff views Scottie, and how Siakam's going to continue to be enabled, and we know OG wants his touches and shots, and so that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch play out. I'm a little bit concerned about the amount of shooting the Raptors can get on the court at any given time. And in a similar fashion to the Pelicans, they have a ton of players who have inclinations towards the paint, inclinations towards the rim. And that is where they're best suited. Not that they can't, get shots up from deep, or they can't get hot. But Siakam, you would prefer if Siakam gets a paint touch rather than takes a three. Same thing with Scottie. You would prefer if Scottie gets a paint touch than gets a three. Pirtle's not shooting any threes.
Yep.
Schroeder is one of the fastest guards in the leagues, and likes to leverage, that advantage creation they get downhill. So the Raptors offensively are going to need to find an identity in a way they can maximize their possession efficiency. And Pirtle's got to play a big role in that, especially by he's an efficient player. I mean, you're not going to give him 20 shots a game, but he's an efficient player. If you can get him consistent looks, he's going to convert at a high percentage at the rim. So using your bigs boost your possession efficiency. he's also going to have to grab a bunch of offensive rebounds, which he's very, very capable of doing. I mean, that's why he's there. And so getting those second chance opportunities. Um, and then lastly, I think the combination of all of those guys who love to try to get to the rim, try to get a paint touch, they're going to have to get to the line a lot as a team. So if you can do those things, and that's a similar model that I'm looking at for the Pelicans, then you can mitigate some of those spacing issues and 3 point, shooting issues. Is you can just be a bruising team that is very physical and annoying to play against, and then you still have those turbo buttons you can hit. Be like, all right, we're gonna get Pirtle off the court. We'll go OG or Siakam at the five, or I don't know who the nominal five is in those situations, but deploy your array of wings and try to just ramp up the transition, right? Try to ramp up the transition offense, space it out a little bit more. Having that versatility is going to be super important for the Raptors, and that's not something they had last year until they traded for Pearl.
Yeah, the versatility in the NBA, you can't just do it one way. You have to be able to play big, play small, play in the in between. A lot of the best teams, we see them go through phases of it during the regular season and little blips of it during the playoffs. The interesting thing with Fred is that he was more positive of a defender after Pirtle got there, but some people think he's over the hill defensively, like guards. When it happens, it can happen pretty quick, or
Right.
it can be a 1 year blip. But I think last year was his least impactful defensive season, maybe of his career. Maybe it trends back up. Maybe it doesn't. The pedigree is important though. The offense stuff is interesting because yes, they have to be able to leverage Pirtle not only as a play finisher, but of course in delay action, in 5 out stuff, and they have to try to like craft spacing with placing guys in the correct quadrants on the floor. And really, if for a possession Pascal is in the corner and he lifts off of a pick and roll instead of starting him above the break in support, that like those are small changes that are meaningful. And maybe you don't see it possession to possession, but over the course of the whole season, that could be something that changes efficiency markers. But the best like 2 week stretch Scottie has ever had has been more so in that big man slash big wing playmaker role and in a lot of delay action, operating out of like split action and like being a dribble handoff hub. He's had games where he's been a good initiator, where he kind of bruises and bashes his way around. He's a tremendous passer. He makes great reads, but he and Pirtle, at least if there isn't like a demonstrative jump in guard skills for Scottie, will be trying to occupy a lot of the same spaces. And even if Scottie does have like a pretty big jump in guard skills, it won't be so much so that he leaps from, like a wing creator to a guard creator. He has to make the leap from big to wing. And then that means that he'll probably try and occupy the same spaces as Pascal. And so they're all good, and like especially for bigs, they're like 6'9" to 7'1", where Jakob is. They range from elite to very good playmakers. You have to try, like it'll be really interesting to see how Darko kind of concocts the offense to see, if it can be successful. And they'll really have to leverage the shooting of OG and Gary Trent Jr. in particular. The thing I want to ask you is that there's also a Brandon Ingram concoct the offense, find the shot profile, find how he works off of other players' thing, because he's tremendously talented too, and can carry an offense for weeks, a month at a time, when things, maybe if the health stuff doesn't work out for the Pelicans, for a stretch. But like when everything's going well, what role does Brandon Ingram play on that team?
It's funny because I think Raptors fans and media are excited about what Darko is going to bring. It's going to be a fresh change after Nick Nurse and his styles. Um, the parallel continues with the Pelicans here, who hired James Borrego. Um, and Borrego, when he was a head coach in Charlotte, was known particularly
Mm-hmm.
for innovative offense, and that's the role that he's brought in here for. And you know, losing Jose Alvarado and Trey Murphy to start the year is not ideal. Though neither of them project to be out for very long. Um, the Pelicans have to get creative with their offense and how they move their pieces around. And as you mentioned, Brandon Ingram, I really do think the ideal role for him is to be the primary playmaker, right? So I think there's this idea of point Zion as this dominant force. And really what happens when point Zion is going on is just Zion has the ball, and he's going to get a high ball screen, or maybe, he's coming off of a delay action. But either way, they're going to try to get the ball in his hands and get him going downhill. And 9 times out of 10, the correct basketball decision when he has the ball is for him to go and try to score it. And he will convert at an abnormally high rate. He's not really there to set the table. He's more of a, okay, I'm reading the help. The help is overwhelming. Then I will find and make the right basketball decision. But more often than not, even when the help is overwhelming, he is going through people and scoring. So I think if you want a primary playmaker, Brandon Ingram is, I think, better suited for that role, getting others involved, bring the ball down the court. And Zion should be more of like the primary scorer next to him, because I think Brandon is uniquely good at generating 3-point shots, as a playmaker. Zion's also very good at that for a different reason, because he's a super massive black hole going to the rim. But Brandon's, because of his length, because of his vision, he can hit skip passes that smaller players struggle to hit over the top of defenses. And so if they're able to leverage Brandon's playmaking, kind of put the ball in his hands more, I think it's a way to keep him engaged throughout the whole game. B, if Zion does end up being the guy that ends up getting the most shots on the team, it helps create the simulation of touches. Like, oh, Brandon's continuing to get touches. He has control of the offense and he can pick his shots to score. I'm sure he's going to still score 20 plus points a game. But if, you empower him to be this, hey, go get 8 assists a game, go get 9 assists a game type of guy, you're going to see another level to him. And I think sneakily, it takes the ball out of CJ's hands. And leverages him as the shooter that he is. He is a very, very capable movement shooter. And what at this stage, CJ on the Pelicans roster, what he needs to be doing is, rather than being a very high volume self creator, he needs to be more of a secondary creator, attacking closeouts, maybe running secondary pick and roll, that kind of stuff, rather than, hey, you're lead guard, you're finally out of Dame Shadow, go prove you're the lead guard. I think that stuff should kind of got in the way the last year and a half since he got traded for, but understandably, because he's like the one of the best vets that these young players have been around, but B, he was brought in to be a leader, and it's difficult to be a leader off the court if you're not empowering him on the court too. But I think the timing is right to scale his on ball usage down, leverage his off ball shooting, use some of your non-shooters to free him open, like put JV in actions with him on the second side over there, like spring him open there. You're gonna pull a big out of the paint doing that, or maybe use Herb Jones to do some of that stuff, or even when Zion's off the ball, you're using those two in conjunction. So yeah, that's how I would structure the offense, and then in the clutch, I would make Zion the primary decision maker. Not playmaker. He doesn't. I wouldn't say he has to get everyone involved, but I would make him the primary decision maker, and then Bi the second one.
I think Ingram is one of those players who classically really great players have to make the skill development. It's got to be there. His are there. And then you kind of have to have the hierarchy of decision making of what you pursue on each possession that really maximizes what you do. I think Pascal Siakam had a couple, you know, turbulent years, not in that he was bad, he was always very good, but just kind of what am I trying to achieve on an offensive possession? And what am I trying to achieve based on who's surrounding me? And if Ingram and Zion figure out that balance, the offense should be unbelievable. And especially if they can continue to find, minutes for Valanciunas, particularly a high amount of minutes. I really like what you say about moving CJ into second side stuff, because having him to save broken plays is going to be more effective than a lot of what other teams have for broken plays. Having him attacking tilted defenses makes like some of his reactive reads better as a passer. And I think that's much better. And Ingram is, you use the term event creator earlier. It's a great term. It's somebody who will make the defense shift and change and do something and will create a response from everybody. Event creators keep everyone involved and make things happen. And Brandon certainly is capable of that. Um, Another big wing. I got to know. I know you pay attention to a lot of stuff around the league. I know you're no slump as far as like an idea of what you think Scottie Barnes is. Do you think there's event creator status for him in the future?
Yeah, Scottie's such an interesting case to me, right? Because he is an extremely talented passer. Uh, and I always like to bet on players who are big and can play make. There's
Sure.
just those are the type of players I gravitate towards. Um, in the draft, like I had Giddy at fourth on my personal draft board because I was like, he's enormous, right?
Wait,
He
can
can
I
he
can
can
I
play
ask
make.
your top 6 if you remember?
Who was that year? So that was 2021, right?
2021, yep. So Cade,
2021.
Mobley,
Yeah.
Green.
Yes. So I went. My top three were as is. So it was
Yep,
Cade. I had Green over Mobley, because I valued shot creation and shot making more than uh Mobley's potential. Because okay, now we're gonna go like a slight tangent of like big men. Like
sure.
I think offense from the big men position is extremely, extremely important. But I also think that like even like the best offensive bigs, unless they can create their own shots or create for others, they tend not to like they tend not to move the needle on offense in terms of like possession efficiency in the playoffs. Strictly playoffs.
Anthony
Strictly,
Davis's
strictly
mid-range
playoffs.
jumper creates
Exactly.
Finals MVP to third or second team All NBA for that
Right.
reason. Yeah,
Like in the regular season, those guys are machines, right? They're efficiency machines because again, they eat up a high percentage. They eat up all the high percentage looks at the rim. They get to the line. They rebound. Those guys are machines. But in the playoffs,
hmm
when it comes to like all chips are at the line. I look at the absolute ceilings. I rather a guy that turns into someone like Donovan Mitchell than like this might be a hot take. This might be a hot take. I rather Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs than Jaren Jackson Jr.
sure.
Like and I think Mobley to me would have had to have showcased like a really high ability to shoot from the perimeter for me to put him over Green. But he was right there. I mean, I had him at three. Not like
Yeah,
I was like, well, don't draft Mobley,
you
like
you can guarantee
uh
possessions for a guy who brings the ball up, but you can't do it for somebody who is on the receiving end of pick and roll actions or post entries, which is why when the Raptors overload on Jokic, Jokic will start bringing the ball up and he can do so.
yeah.
But they wouldn't do that with Anthony Davis. The Lakers
Right.
will just have a game where they don't really get much going for Davis,
And even Towns in the playoffs is
right?
like he can be game planned against, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it was Cade, Green, Mobley. I had Giddy, Scottie. Who I got to pull up this draft class.
There
Let me
was
pull up this draft class real
Kuminga,
quick.
there was Suggs, there was Franz, there was all these guys.
Oh yeah, I was very very low on Suggs. I think I want to say I had Kuminga next just because of his general prototype as an athletic wing. Um, oh yeah, okay. So here we go. Uh, I had this was the Trey Murphy year.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was definitely the Trey Murphy year. I had Shingun in my top eight. I remember that.
Wow.
Um, and I had Franz was 10ish. Moody was I want to say 11. I was pretty high on Trey Murphy. Oh yeah, I had Jalen Johnson pretty high. I was like the tools are there. He's just can they get everything else going for him? But I had Jalen Johnson pretty high. I was a believer in Jalen Johnson. And I think I was a believer in Book Night, and I think that was a big miss. I was a pretty big believer in
That's
Book
a
Night.
tough one, yeah. But the
Yeah.
first five, good. Giddy and Scottie both really strong, and those guys weren't consensus at 4 or 5 either. I don't believe so.
Yeah, I remember. I know for a fact I had Giddy at 4, and I was like not a fan of Suggs. Like, I'm sure he was probably in my top 10, but I was very vocally like I wouldn't have drafted Suggs if I had that pick, and I was very against Davion Mitchell. I just don't like small defensive guards.
Yeah.
That's a prototype. That's not my favorite. Not in the lotto, right? You can take them later on, just not at where they were drafted.
And if you can get them undrafted and then have them get a finals MVP vote, all the better with Fred VanVleet.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
as we were saying, you believe in bigs or wings that play make in regards to
Yes.
Scottie.
So going back to Scotty and what his development is. So like his challenge is going to be, can he be the player that earns the touches, the possessions as a decision maker over somebody else,
Right.
right? So like if you put him on a team with Darius Garland's probably gonna get those touches over him,
Hmm.
right? But if you put him on a team with Schroeder, then very possible that Scotty's getting there. So one, he has to separate himself from other guards who are play similar roles, right? Two, he's got to show that if he's not getting those touches at that capacity, that he can be more of a connector, a hub, and that's going to unfortunately depend on how many shooters there are on the roster because a lot of those connector and hub type roles, they really, really excel if there are other players who can draw attention, who have their own gravity and tilt the defense, and then they can read the tilted defense very, very quickly and get the ball to the right places. Lonzo Ball, excellent in that role, right? Lonzo Ball downloads like the information on the court. He's not very good at creating the hole in the defense, but once that hole is created, you get the ball to him, like Lonzo will get it to the right place,
They
right?
make the
Um,
ultimate pass on like 99% of attempts. They just always find
yes,
the pass with the highest percentage of creating a bucket.
absolutely, and so like those are two different hats, and playmakers aren't not necessarily good at both. There are
Hmm.
some players who are very good at one, not good at the other, and vice versa, right? And I do think that Scotty's best quote unquote position is probably going to come at the 4. And the way I would construct a team around him would obviously have as much shooting as possible, but then you want to put him in mismatch situations where he can take some of those bigger guys off the dribble, um, and play make from there. So like it's it's difficult because Siakam is already there, so it's like you kind of want to like start ushering him towards that role, but what is a challenge for him is he's not the scorer that Siakam is at the moment. Now, Siakam was what, like 25 before he like really started scoring
Yeah, I think age
at like
25
a
was when he popped off.
crazy
Yep.
level, and Scotty is what, 21, 22, something like
22,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, so there is clearly a lot of time for him to develop into something like that, and NBA rosters turn over so much and so frequently. So like I'm not concerned about today's fit necessarily when it comes to his like long term development. But he is going to have to either make a leap as a scorer, and that's going to come from either getting efficient shots at a high level or getting to the line at a high level, or take that leap as a playmaker passer. There's a lot of these guys that were like on this spectrum of like, hey, they're not the greatest shooters, but they're very big and they're very talented at passing the ball. Like the extreme end of that is like Ben Simmons, right? Extremely
Yeah.
athletic, menace in transition, very good at passing the ball, and then come playoffs, just very difficult to accommodate in the half court. Um, I think Scotty's better at some aspects already than like
Oh
Ben
yeah.
Simmons ever used to be.
Oh yeah.
But like I'm not sure he necessarily has that turbo button that Ben was a freak, like is was I don't know what the proper terminology is for him at the moment, but like when Ben was healthy, like he had a turbo button that like not many people in the league possessed. And so like but can Scotty play a lot of like the same function that Simmons did? Absolutely. I think like grabbing rebounds, pushing in transition, like tilted defenses, like spraying when he's drawing defenders, that kind of stuff. Um, but the half court stuff to really maximize him, I think there's going to need to be more shooting on the roster. B, he's going to have to pick up like more stuff off ball, like just more intentional with the cutting, or start getting him used to like used in screening actions, which again helps when you have shooters. So it's like some of that is context dependent, but I think this is kind of a big year for him to showcase like, hey, like which direction are you headed in?
Yeah. It's clear also that the Raptors prefer the potential future of Scottie as far as like to frame how they build the team going forward than they do Siakam's current prime. And like that's objective. There are very clear signs for that. The thing that's interesting is that they're both really talented. Siakam will see what happens with the the price tag that comes with him. But if Scottie makes a big leap as a scorer, they can become a tenable pair together. But if Scottie sticks in that more so connector role, then it's hard to envision them together at all. Because this was when I in Scottie's rookie season, I watched every possession and charted it and kind of popped it all out. I was like, this guy has a very clear high ceiling, like a star ceiling, based off of being one of the best connectors in the game and a guy who can score in isolation off of mismatches because he's so comfortable with push shots and can get to the rim. Big guy, small guy. If it's a mismatch, he makes it work. And he's very comfortable with contact, isn't abhorrent from the free throw line as a pseudo big, right? And then when I tracked all of his passes this past season and was kind of like identifying how many of his assists are advantage assists, where you really gift guys the easiest shots, his ratio, and I went to Jason Tatum and Draymond Green and tracked theirs as well. Scottie had a higher ratio of advantage to assists than both of those guys. It's like you get really easy shots when Scottie gets to process the floor. But of course, with Steph and Clay and all those guys running split actions off of Draymond and DHOs, Draymond, just by proxy of surrounded by better shooting, the greatest shooters of all time, means there's more advantages, more events to make reads in. And then with Tatum, Tatum is collapsing the defense. And so Scottie sits like right in between those two guys. You could do it with a bunch of players, but those are the guys I watched. Right between those two guys is like, this is a guy who you don't know which way he goes. It seems like probably I've watched maybe as far as like people who talk about Scottie, more Scottie film than anyone else. It seems like he'll end up leaning closer to connector who can do the mismatch thing. But he could save the current core if he makes that leap to score, like really takes a big step. And the skills to do that very clearly haven't been there yet. But if they develop, the Raptors, it completely changes how they have to build. But if he could still be an all-star like in the blink of an eye. Yeah,
Here's
go
a
ahead.
comp for you. It's not a perfect comp, of course, because they do different things. But in terms of like that connector usage, the kind of being a hub stuff, a guy that comes to mind is Bam. And I think like Bam obviously using a ton of handoff actions, using his unique ability to score at the rim, to create playmaking opportunities. Now Miami's been or blessed, or you could say that that's their skill in finding shooters, right? Like over the years, Duncan Robinson, Tyler Arrow, Gabe Vincent, all of these guys, Max Strus, they've been able to get the necessary shot making to fully use Bam's unique playmaking to that extent. But Bam is not Jokic. He's not that kind of a playmaker. He's also not Ben Simmons. He's just Bam. He's uniquely him. He's not even. I would say he's not even Sabonis, right? Um, and I think like I'm curious to see if Scottie's gonna trend more towards the Bam trajectory in
Sure.
terms of offensive offensive ability.
And like the and how players want to like just plug themselves in is a different thing too. Like Scottie is a lot more aggressive in getting his own looks, especially the contested type, than Bam is. Especially when, and this is part of the function of like the Nick Nurse isolation Raptors offense does kind of push players towards go get a bucket because the framework of the offense isn't going to do you much. Whereas in Miami, the framework of the offense is everything. And when they have to break things apart, Bam has had stretches where he's looked really good. He's had stretches of a lot of passivity. And Scottie, that's why it's like comps are never perfect because not only are there skill sets, but it's how players kind of plug in their skill sets. And then there's measurements and all that kind of stuff too. But yeah, Scottie is really interesting. I think like the all-star ceiling there, or all-star potential, I should say, is like it's fully intact despite a lot of people not liking his second season. And if he makes leaps as a scorer and would have to do so with meaningful development in his on-ball game that has to come from work in the off season and all that kind of stuff, then like the superstar stuff is still there because he reads the floor so well. And the defense,
So if you, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
yeah,
you.
yeah, go go.
If you could add one skill to his, between these two skills, he becomes a 38% 3-point shooter at his current volume, which
Wait,
is
wait,
what, like
I'm gonna
four-ish.
be a bit of a like a nitpicker. You have to tell me like what kind of shots does he take?
This current shot diet. So he's taking 4.1 threes a game.
Okay,
And his shot diet like virtually the
right,
same as it was this
right,
past year. But instead of hitting what 28%, he hits 38%.
okay.
Um, so you take that, or he becomes a guy that gets to the free throw line um, 6 times a game.
6? That's it? Oh, I
I
don't
mean,
think I like I don't
that's
think I like
doubling doubling his
I
current.
know, I know. Paolo was like at 7 last year. I need man, I guess in that scenario, I, I think I'd pick the 38%,
Okay,
but if you offered me like instead of numbers, skill sets, like an elite handle at his size versus better catch and shoot player, I would choose the elite handle for sure.
makes sense.
Something like that. But yeah, 38% would be great. If he caps out at 6 free throw attempts per game, I'm pretty underwhelmed because he is really physical and he's very comfortable with contact. So I'd like
Interesting.
to see him climb
Okay,
higher. That would be a cool thing this year, like a cool progression if he was just eating at the line. I know you kind of prescribed that as something that the Raptors have to achieve at the
for
top.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be, if he's able to start trending in that direction. That'll take your, like, the Raptors offense and his offense as a
Yeah.
whole, like, to the next level. Because, like, unfortunately, for whatever the circumstances is, whether it's usage, or just youth or whatever, like, for his dimensions and his skill set, like, he has not gotten to the line a lot.
Yeah.
um, and that's an area where he should be thriving at, regardless of how well he shoots from there or not. I think that's the unimportant part. He should get there, and so I think personally, like, I would take the free throw aggression. If you tell me you can get to the line 6 times a game, you think of the trickling effects that'll have in terms of getting teams to the bonus, and like how that probably travels more to the road than that, like, than shooting might, or maybe that, I like, unless he becomes like a straight up grifter, right? Because then you're like, okay, well, that's not really going to translate to the playoffs. But um yeah, I mean, I think that'd be interesting to see.
I think I'm probably being a little bit greedy. It was I actually, you know what it is? I had a conversation earlier today about Paolo and Franz and kind of like who might have the higher potential, and we won't discuss that here. But the free throw stuff came up, and I saw that Paolo was at 7 in his rookie year. So, and I know he's like a legendary rookie free throw guy, obviously, but hearing 6 after seeing 7 for a rookie, I was like, wait, that can't be it. And 38% is already pretty high for like the size and dimensions of Scottie. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
Scottie he's one of the coolest young players in the league. He has a lot of fans for a reason. He's also kind of has a magnanimous Twitch personality, which helps. But I'm excited to see however it turns out, and the Raptors are obviously very invested in that. I'd want to talk about Trey Murphy at the end because I adore his game, but two guys I want to talk about beforehand: Grady Dick and Jordan Hawkins, maybe the two best shooters in the draft. One goes to the Pelicans, one goes to the Raptors. Grady seen as a better reactive shooter, kind of intuitively shaping up around guys who are creating advantages. Jordan, his motion and like sprinting off of screens was basically the basis of how UConn achieved things. Who do you think's a better shooter for over the course of their career?
Wow. Oh wow. Okay. I think from pure shooting, I would have to pick Hawkins because of the just the pure degree of difficulty on his shots and at the volume that he took them and made them. I think he had an argument for best college shooter in all of college last year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Totally.
um, and certainly that's something the Pelicans do argue. Like on draft night, they said that explicitly. Um, I think as a pure
He could
shooter,
run a 100-meter dash and catch a ball at the finish line and get a shot up like in form. He's
right?
really impressive at like just collecting himself for a jumper.
Agreed. Yeah, the mechanics are pristine. Everything about him speaks efficiency and movement, efficiency and the translation of momentum. Uh, it's a very rare skill set to be able to shoot the way he shoots.
Yeah. So then moving away from that, adding to the shooting. Grady obviously the higher pick, but that matters on draft night, and then immediately afterwards everyone's just a player. Especially what was it, like 13, 18, or around there, like that's the range.
One pick away, actually. Yeah,
Right, 13, 14.
yeah.
And like it's not a super big deal. Even the money side of things isn't a super big deal. But as far as overall play, Grady has the size, Jordan has the quicker foot speed. Who do you think drafted the better player? I'd like let's
The
have fun with things.
Raptors.
Yeah.
The Raptors. I was not. I mean, there's no secret here. I'm not a fan of the Jordan Hawkins pick at all. I was excited, and when Grady Dick was falling and he made it to 13, I was like, just one more pick, like he'd be a good one for the Pelicans, especially at his young age at 19. Obviously the Raptors drafted him, so that was someone I was rooting for at that moment. And then the Pelicans ended up taking Hawkins, who you know, um, I really hope that his shooting translates at an elite level because in order for him to get on the court and make an impact, he's going to need to shoot 41, 42% at volume.
Hmm.
He just unfortunately does not provide much of anything else. You can't rely on him to handle the ball. You can't rely on him to get to the free throw line. Can't rely on him to rebound, assist. He's a shooter. I don't want to like say he's like JJ Redick, right? But because JJ Redick is a guy that played the league 15 years or whatever, and one of the best shooters of all time. So like JJ found a way to make it work and was elite throughout. I think JJ's like best case scenario for Jordan Hawkins. I think he's closer to like I would say like his like on a balance, if you like play his career out 100 times, like the average outcome is Wayne Ellington. And
Mm,
a guy that was in the league again for like 10, 12 years, but someone who never really made a positive impact on like he was just like a kind of like a replacement level player analytically for the majority of teams that he was on. Certainly not someone that returned lottery value, especially to the team that drafted him. I think
sure. His biggest year was
I
with
have
Miami. Later on.
yeah, right. He was 30, 31 when he like had that season, right? His best season, which is the Pelicans drafted a guy for a specific need, and that's very against my personal draft philosophy because I think again, like every 3 years, the average like 75% of the average NBA roster will turn over every 3 years. So like you're drafting a guy for a need, where in 3 years from now you might not even have that need, and the average first round pick before they start out producing on the average veteran minimum contract, it takes about 4 years if they ever do it. A lot of them just don't, right? A lot of them just never even reach the level where they're out producing the average minimum contract. And so just a combination of things to me made it a very low upside pick. And they went for the safe play, which there's no guarantee like this play is going to be safe in any capacity. And there are players who who are like have a similar skill set or would play a similar role that like went for the vet minimum,
Okay.
Malik Beasley, vet minimum, right? So it's just like it's hard for me to get excited. Obviously, I'm going to root for him, and I hope he turns into, like Steph without handles, right? Just make bombing threes from everywhere, just like an elite movement shooter, and that elevates Zion uniquely. Like I'm rooting for all of that, but that's best case scenario, and I struggle to get excited about it.
Okay. So as somebody who also I much preferred Gradey to Jordan, and just Gradey, I think even at you wanted him at 14, probably would have thought it was a steal. I think he was a steal at 13. The people who listen to this podcast heard my draft night coverage. They heard me talk about him beforehand. Why do you love Grady? I'm sure Raptors fans will like revel in this. Tell us about him.
Well, Grady again, it's just like obviously you can never predict how a 19-year-old is going to develop, but you see flashes with him where you're like, okay, he's gonna give you stuff beyond the shooting, right? He's potentially gonna be a guy that can put the ball on the floor at a decent level. He's gonna be a guy that can make some of those reads as guys are attacking him on the closeouts. He's gonna be a guy that can generate defensive events. So it's just like I thought Grady was a uniquely versatile player in which I think if you had the most surface level look at him, you'd be like, oh, he's just another white shooter that is tall. And it's just like, I thought Grady was so much more than that. And like the ancillary skills that he brings were enticing. And again, Grady may not end up being anything, right? It's just impossible to predict with any draft picks. But I thought the combination of skills that he had uniquely were worth betting on at 13 and 14 in a great way because you're not his pathways to being a successful player do not only rely on him hitting 40% from three
Yep.
or 41% from three, where I think for Hawkins the majority of pathways for him to be a successful player in the league rely on him being an elite shooter, and if he's not, then you ask yourself like what are his pathways to success, and I think you come up short looking for reasons on that.
Yeah. Grady is a guy who, we talked about connector. He makes a lot of those really great, quick, connective reads. He is a guy who, if, as you say, like there's upside as far as putting the ball on the floor, not only does he make good reads, against shifting defenses when he gets those longer closeouts, but it's also that when he gets, empty side actions, he can make reads downhill to a roller. He can extend the play with the skip pass, and he is a very intuitive mover offensively that not only fuels his shooting, kind of shaping up off of and forming up two drives, but also a guy who will make the cut at the correct time. And while not, the best finisher, with adding strength and at his size, should be able to finish, a decent amount of looks at the rim. It's just like that activity, being able to contribute, a few different ways. I think you hit it perfectly that there's divergent pathways, and a lot of them result in like, we're very happy to have this guy. Whereas Jordan, sometimes a lot of those guys don't really figure it out, and they provide the most impact on their like third or fourth contract when they're like, okay, I finally sorted it
Majority
out.
of times.
And that won't really benefit the team that drafted him. But those guys do have to be drafted. It's just like it
Yeah,
works
like
out.
I did a breakdown on like similar guys that like met Jordan's like statistical profile, and it was like Pat Connaughton, like Wayne Ellington, like all like a bunch of guys who were like, hey, like you can point to a moment on like any given team that they're on, be like, hey, that guy was useful, right? That guy was important. They like brought him wins, and it's just like, but can you point to that moment on the team that drafted him? Very rarely.
Yeah.
So it's just like like is Jordan Hawkins gonna be in the league a long time? I would feel comfortable betting on that. Is Jordan Hawkins going to return lottery value and or move the needle for the Pelicans? I would not be comfortable betting on
Yeah.
that.
Well, let's talk about somebody who is going to I estimate return like a just heaps and heaps of value over the course of his career and for the Pelicans. The injury is tough, but Trey Murphy, like just the player. I'm for an audience that might not be super into Trey Murphy. What's the pitch? Because I love his game.
I would feel like the Raptors fans would be super into Trey Murphy just because it fits the model of everything that they've been wanting. No, uh, Trey is someone I'm a huge believer in. Um, I think he is an obscenely efficient player to the point where the
Hmm.
Pelicans are doing themselves a disservice in not discovering where the efficiency drop off threshold is. They got to ramp this guy's usage up, they got to ramp this guy's shots up until they find a drop. I mean, he was like 65% true shooting last year, 66, something absurd like that. Um, yeah, keep feeding him possessions. On the back half of the year, obviously the Pelicans didn't make the playoffs. He did see, an increased role. He was pretty much the third option with Zion out and them not deciding to feature Jonas much. And he was like, I think I'm pretty sure in the back half of the year he had like a 70% true shooting, just insane amounts of efficiency from him. So like offensively, I think he has the potential to be. Obviously, he's a very, very good shooter, elite shooter, very, very athletic and dunk on anybody. So it's like a high level, two level scorer at the moment. He spent a lot of this summer working on the mid range, trying to add counters to his game on closeouts where like, hey, like I might not be able to get all the way to the rim. So instead of trying to jump through or over four people, let me just like pull up from here. That's something he worked on. But I think that even if that part of his game doesn't take a massive leap, he can be used like someone like Laurie Markkinen is currently used in Utah, where it's just like he's 6'9", he's got like a 40-inch vert, got a really good wingspan. So maybe you start putting him in some like of those quote unquote big man actions that get him going downhill, or just like some of those Chicago actions where it's like, hey, he's got the ball in stride and like that guy is going to live at the free throw line and he's a 90% free throw shooter. So you got to leverage his vertical athleticism a little more, uh, in my opinion. And I'm hoping Borrego is going to do some of that. Rather than like, hey, like you're trying to turn him into like a Paul George or even a Jalen Brown. It's like, I don't think he needs to be that. Can he be? Should he continue to work on those skills? I think he's definitely going to continue to work on those skills. But like, kind of like going back to the idea of like, hey, like what are your pathways towards being a star, right? Not like he's already, in my opinion, an elite role player. You can plug
Hmm.
him into any team and he's going to contribute at a high level. The next step is what is your pathway to being a star? I think he has a few pathways because of his athleticism, because of his shot. And I'm excited to see like which direction they go in with him and how he continues to develop.
There's a comp here, right? Like OG is a guy who he didn't get as much of a chance. Like I don't think the Raptors went to it early enough, but OG was a guy who year over year the scoring increases at a slower rate than Trey, of course, but year over year the scoring increases and the true shooting just remains above 60%. It's like you got to see how many possessions that guy can take on. Of course it can result in OG who has struggled to self-create. Now we know, but like you have to know, you have to figure it out. And Trey is just like, goddamn, he's very good at basketball. I think one of the most important things for the Pelicans is figuring out like how high does the ceiling go with this guy? Can he like smash through the roof of what people's perception is? And then even if he doesn't, if he fails, the same thing with OG. OG is still considered like a guy who will provide close to all-star level impact, even if he like he'll never make that game, but as far as like being important to winning on teams that want to make deep runs, being important to winning over the course of 82 games, getting you to the playoffs, like Trey Murphy can slouch into that, at the end of it all. But why not see, how high it goes? I adore his game. I know it was never happening, but when the trade talks were worrying about and the Pelicans are like, well, maybe not the Pelicans, people were like, the Pelicans and Fred VanVleet, I was like, ooh, I would do unbelievable things for Trey to come back. Obviously,
Yeah.
that was never
Yeah.
feasible. But the fan
No,
casting,
no.
I had a
I
dream.
can tell you for a fact that like Griff is not a Fred VanVleet guy. So like that was I think people trying to wish some stuff in existence. Or I think the Pelicans are in a unique situation where like any like star, all star, or any good player that is on the market, the Pelicans name will get attached to them just because they have the assets, they have the young players, all of that. So opposing teams will happily like, oh, I heard the Pelicans called, and just like try to leverage that against their actual
That happened
suitors.
to the Raptors, right? The Raptors like, we
Yeah,
will not trade Scottie Barnes for Kevin Durant because everyone's like, well, the Raptors could make that big trade, and KD was like, I'm not going there, and the Nets were not
right.
like the Nets didn't want Scottie Barnes. It was just like, this is a team that had a good record, has all their guys on contract, and has young players. They're in every rumor, and yeah, the Pelicans are definitely in that. God, Trey Murphy, I would trade a lot for Trade Murphy. Trade Murphy.
Oh my gosh, it was when the Pelicans traded for CJ. The Portland fans were like, "Oh, we're gonna get your Trey Murphy," and like I was just rolling my eyes. It's like, no, you're not getting Trey Murphy in a CJ trade. You're probably not even getting him in a Dame trade. So like,
He's
yeah, he's very very valued. The Pelicans know what they have. I'll say that.
that's good. Hopefully that means there's like hemorrhaging usage his way would be a cool thing when he gets
I hope
back
so.
into the swing of things. Um,
Right.
Parting shots. Anything you want to say about the Pelicans or the Raptors before we get out of here?
I hope they both have healthy seasons
Yeah,
and successful seasons. That's really all I want to say. I mean, I think both teams are built similarly. I think they have slightly different driving engines, but the concept is largely the same. If Zion's healthy, he's going to attack the paint and play make, and if Pascal is healthy, he's going to be an All NBA player by doing a lot of the same stuff. Uh, and yeah, I think these two teams are teams I think poised to make life difficult for a lot of other teams in the league.
yeah. That's something I didn't want to hammer on too hard because there's 29 guests, and I've talked about like top 5 defensive potential for the Raptors with a bunch of them, but it's something that like you're obviously aware about. Just it could be really good on that end.
I also the last thing I would do want to say, it just crossed my mind, is I do think both of these teams are at a crossroads where this season will define the direction they go in the future. And if this is enough for the Pelicans specifically, if this is another season of not having help from their best two players or just disappointment, I would be shocked if they bring back both Bi and Zion, or just either of them. So I think the Pelicans need this to be a successful season in order to continue down this road. And likewise, I think the Raptors do as well. Big year with Pascal's free agency. Um, Obviously,
Pascal,
OG,
OG, and Gary Trent Jr., all of them
Gary
expiring.
Trent. Yeah. So unresolved stuff on both sides here. And winning cures all. So if fans want to keep these teams together, they better hope these teams win at a good clip.
Yeah, got to win some games. Pascal said that I think like 18 times in interviews, like at the end of games last year. He's like, winning fixes everything, and I think he said that expecting the momentum of the Raptors to power through these stretches, but they didn't really.
Yeah.
Shamit, yeah, time to plug yourself. Where can the people find you? What should they be reading? All that good stuff.
Yeah, no, this season my coverage will exclusively be on my Substack, which is intheknow.substack.com. And yeah, as the season kicks off here, I think Media Day is going to be October 2nd or 1st for us. One of those days, I will start pushing my content. It's been a good summer, good little hiatus of where I haven't really had to think too much, but I'm very, very excited to get back in the swing of things, and you can find all my stuff there.
So for anybody who finds the Pelicans to be a very interesting team, I can recommend that. But also as somebody who has read some of Shamit's other stuff, he zooms out of the league at large and looks at like these macro trends too. You can just find like really great basketball stuff in addition to the Pelican stuff in his writing. So for anybody who wants that, please tune in. And to everybody who tuned into this, thank you. We appreciate the time. Look forward to more of these. Shamit, thank you very much for coming on. And hey, that's it. Thanks for enjoying the podcast. We'll get out of here. See ya.